Okay, hi guys. So this chapter is called Ghosts. Word of the end of the companions had clearly reached Din Eden days ago, and as we rode up from the royal farm, we could smell the stunned grieving of the town all about us, and hear the silence. No town that is not dead can ever be completely quiet, but along Eden Ridge, there was no more than the ready making of the war trail, the smoke and the clangor of the armorers, the neigh of the horses, the young men and the laughter, and the snatches of song. There were people about, women spinning in the doorways, looked up as we rode by. Men dropped whatever they were doing and turned to watch us pass. Children and dogs were playing in the dust behind the cobbled way. Several times girls called out to us, asking for this one or that one of the companions. For Tiddlewick, that is that name that I'll never understand that name. Let me look back to the front. See if I'm going to look at it really quick. Oh, wow. Okay. Tidwolf. Completely not what I thought it was. Tidwolf. Or Mad Dog. Or Morian. Twice girls came running to ask for Sinan, not recognizing him. Anrian made them some kind of reply, I do not know what. There was no welcome. Later there might be, but not now. And the news and the loss was still too raw. Only we felt eyes following us after we had gone by, the eyes of the people of Eden, wondering why we had come back, of all those who had ridden out less than 2 moons ago. We came up past the steep horse paddock to the gate of the den, and the men of the guard passed us through into the outer court. Word of our coming must have run ahead, and men were gathered there to draw us in. Men whose faces we knew, it seemed, from another life. A knot of richer color showed where the women of the royal house stood clustered together before the inner gate, and out of the midst of them the Princess Nyama came running to catch the reins of Sinan's horse. She checked there, looking at him. She knew him well enough, and I saw her face puzzled for a moment, then white and stricken. Sinan did not return her look, or seem to know that she was there at all. One of the older women came and pulled her away, and then the men of the Tiulu were all around us as we dropped from our saddles, and hands came out of nowhere, as it seemed, to take the reins and lead our horses away. And we were back where we had not thought to be again, standing like ghosts in the outer court of the Din Eden. That night, our battle-stained rags were replaced by decent clothes, and the worst of our filth washed off, and we sat at supper once again in the king's meat hall. We knew by then that Aethelfirth was still living. The messengers had come in days ago, and the thing was common knowledge through Dunedin. And the food, when it came, had a bitter taste to it. Con and his mates, who had not had supped in hall before, sat on the guest bench just within the main door. Anrian was in the old place at the high table. Sinan sat among the warriors of the Tilulu, and at one of the long side tables that was his old place. But before my time, they made him welcome there, but I also saw that they left a little space on either side of him, as though no one cared to risk touching or being touched, and I wondered if living men had left the same gap between themselves and the silent warriors who had passed through the cauldron of Anwan. The horn sounded, and the king was brought in, leaning on the shoulders of the 2 of his household warriors, and the queen and the royal women following after, the champion and the steward and all the others of the household, and among them Thanes of Syracuse. I had not known whether he was alive or dead, and a warmth woke in me in the sight of him, though he looked 10 years older than when I had last seen him, and walked stooping a little forward to one side, as I had seen men walk since, hunched over in an old body wound. They eased the king into his high seat. The horn sounded again, and the food was brought in. Food as fitting for a king's hall as ever we had eaten there, and the yellow mead with its faintly bitter aftertaste that I never noticed so strongly before. But no harp song, not that night, and the hall itself felt half empty. was half empty. I mind the bare benches in the lower hall and that had been built on them to make room for the 300, and the great roof that ties naked of the weapons and the armor that had been used to hang there. Sinan seemed aware of the emptiness also, and the first time that he had shown awareness of the world around him. More than once I saw him lift his head and look about as though seeking the crowding faces that he had been used to find in there. Then, failing in the search, he would sink away inside himself again and return to playing with the food before him or watching the fire. When the eating was done, the royal women had gone back to their own place, leaving the task of keeping the mead cups filled to the armor bearers. The king stirred in his great chair and turned stiffly to Anrian, seeming to nerve himself up for what he knew must come. Now, Prince of Bards, let you tell me what there is for the telling. There was a sudden piercing silence all up and down the hall, and in the silence Anrian told all there was for the telling, from the night attack on the royal steading, or through the taking over of the old fort and the raids of the gathering Saxon war hordes, the waiting of the men of Elmet and the other British kingdoms who never came. I was watching the king's face, and I saw how it flinched and then tightened into a mask when Anrian reached this part, and how his grunt hands gripped on the four-post of his chair until the knuckles were like bare bones, betraying all the mask concealed. Anrian never paused, but told steadily on of the tightening siege and the decision to make that last desperate charge, the decision also that he himself must return living to Dunedin. The silence that closed over his words was such that in a little pale moon moth he fluttered through the hall, we would have heard the plushing of its wings. And in the silence he turned his head and he looked down on the warrior benches to where I stood with the mead jar in my hands. There is no more than I can tell of at this time, he said. Prosper, son of Girotonus, shield bearer to Sinan Clindone. The rest of the telling is for you. I had not thought of that, though I might have done. And for a moment I felt the breath gone from me. I set the mead jar down slowly with great care, as though a drop spilled on the trestle board would have been the end of the world. Mindog's gaze came upon me, and I could feel it. I could feel the eyes of every man in the king's hall, save Sinan, who sat staring into the fire. My breath came back to me, and I took up the story where Anrian had laid it down. I told it as well as it was in me, though stumbling and with long gasps between, knowing that unless Sinan came up to be himself again, I was the only one who could tell it, just as Anrian was the only one who could make the great song. I told of the last ride of the Shining Company. I told of the fighting between the river and the woods. I told of the last sight of our captain, who was the king's son, broken and hoisted aloft on the points of spears. I thought for a moment something moved behind the mask. I told of the end of the fighting, and how Sinan was wounded among the gravestones by the north road, and how I had killed the man with a club, and of what came after, with Sinan tied up onto his horseback. We came up with Anrian and the others at the edge of dawn. My part of the story was done, and I looked up to give it back to Anrian, but he left it lying, feeling, I suppose, that what was left did not need a king's bard for the telling. So I took it up again. I could be told briefly enough. We lay up for the daylight and rode through the night, and at dawn to a place that had once been a Roman posting station, a place guide knew of, safe from the Saxon kind. We waited there several days for my lord Sinan to gather some strength. We rode on by day, for we were beyond the Saxons' reach by then. We came into good God Odin territory, and our guide turned back to his own people. We lodged the night with a clan chieftain known to the patrols of last year. My lord Arian asked if the Crane Terra had come to his wrath. He said that it had come, and that his younger son and the 14 warriors of the Wrath had gone to the hosting place and waited there for 3 days, and that my lord the king had bidden them back to their own hearths. He said, not upon us the blame. I heard what I had said, and I saw the king's face show for an instant behind the mask. There was coldness in my belly. Then Anrian spoke again, and then that trained harper's voice of his that seemed to be pitched only for the king and yet carried the length of a half-empty hall. So we have told all it is that is ours for the telling, and let Minindog the king tell in his turn whatever is his. For the time that might cover 3 heartbeats, Minindog sat looking at his own skeleton hand on the 4-post, turning it so that the taper light woke the life and the color in the great ring he wore. Then he looked up and he said straightly, "Ask then, Prince of all bards, and I will answer." Anrian asked gently, "My lord the king, why did the war host never come to us?" And the king answered, "Never come." And the king answered, "Because no other of the northern kingdoms answered the call, having fears and frontiers of their own to spend their swords on, each of one fearing what his neighbors would do if he sent his warriors on such a war trail. He was fighting the dry, brittle cough. In the old days, his son on his bard would have taken up the speaking for him, but his son was dead, and Anrian could not speak for him in this. What of the Gododin war bands bound by the Crantera?" Anrian asked. The king's voice was straining in his chest, but he forced the words out. If I had sent my own war bands, their chance would have been small indeed against the joined host of Dyria and Bernicia. I judged that my shining and beloved 300 were enough to lose. I judged also that in their going down they would take such a hero portion of the Saxons with them that they would come thrusting no further into our heartlands until they had done licking their wounds a few years, the lifetime of a man. We bought your time for you a little. I thought for an instant of the sunlight lying across the schoolroom table at home, and the unrolled Herodotus with the mold spots on the parchment. Tell them in Sparta. But after that time is up, by then I may have found a way to bind my sticks into a faggot after all," said the king. That the shamed and angry silence of the Tililu was enough to set off the roof beams afire, though in all the place no man moved. "My lord the king," Anrian said, "could you not have trusted us with the truth?" The king drew a long, painful breath. "No man should ride on such a trail altogether without hope. I was not quite without hope myself at the outset." He began to cough, arched over himself, making yellow flax on the checkered silk at the breast of his mantle. And while he still coughed, through the paroxysm was passing, Sinan, who had sat unmoving and staring into the fire throughout, got up to his feet and stood swaying, and then, with a terrible howling cry, pitched forward across the table, scattering the remnants of the meal and oversetting the meat jar in a yellow flood. On the king's orders, when he could speak again, we bore Sinan to the inner palace. Word of what had happened must have run ahead of us, for the queen herself, with some of her women hovering behind him, met us in the gateway in the inner court. "Carry him to the woman's house," she said. "It will be easier for us to tend to him there." So we carried him up to the woman's house, which clung like a cluster of lime-washed birds' nests to the highest point of the fortress rock, and laid him on a bed spread with soft rugs and pillows of striped wool that showed as bright as flowers in the light of wax tapers that had already been brought in. The Princess Niama was there, and she made a tiny whimpering sound, bending over him as we laid him down and touched the broken side of his face, as a woman does these things very gently. "That will help," said the queen, and bade one of her women fetch hot water with clean linen and certain herbs from her still room, called for a brazier, and ordered the warriors away who had come to carry him back to their own place. I think that the order was for me too, but I did not go with them. I could not help it that I was in that woman's part of the palace. I belonged where Sinan was, and I think the queen must have understood that, for she did not repeat the order. For a moment, when the princess touched him, his eyelids began to flicker, and I had thought that he was coming back to himself. But the flickering ceased, and he drifted again from us. By morning, despite the strange brews that the queen's trickled into him, drop by drop, and the pungent smoke of the herbs burning on the charcoal brazier, he was in some kind of a fever. The king's own physician came up from the monastery and pronounced the wound clean, but he shook his head and talked of bruising into the brains. also a position by demons brought away from the battlefield. He shook his head at the queen's remedies too, and ordered different ones of his own. Their infusing to be timed with paternosters. The queen listened to him with courtesy, and when he was gone, threw out his remedies and returned to her own, and applied with older healing spells. For 3 days the fever raged through him like a fire, despite all the infusions of yarrow and black willow bark. The women of the queen's household tended him through the days, while I caught a few hours of sleep in the corner of the chamber, and at night I took over watching through the dark. I did not easily forget those nights in the women's house, the long-fingered light and the shadows of the small nightlight lamp on the wall, and the heady smoke of herbs burning in the brazier, the faint scratch and rustle of birds nesting in the thatch, and for time to time the sound of women's voices or a bubble of laughter, and always the low muttering of Sinan on the bed. For the fever, maybe from the moment in the king's hall, speech had come back to him, though so low and broken that at times there was no making sense of it. But at others, squatting close beside him, I knew he was living, and again, through the days of the siege, though through the last charge of that shining company, through the deaths of his brothers. And in the midst of the 4th night, I must have drifted into a doze, my head propped up on updrawn knees. I woke up with a start to an unusual quietness in the room. For a moment I wondered what sound was lacking, and then realized that Sinan's low mutterings had ceased. I came to my knees and was leaning over him on an instant, fear gnawing in my belly. He was breathing slowly and quietly, and the constant restless movement of his head on the pillow had ceased. I got up and took the lamp from its wall niche and brought it to the bed, shielding it with my hand so that the light should not fall into his eyes. The little flame flickered for a moment, then steadied, and then I saw the sweat on his face and pooled in the creases of his neck, and when I put my hand on the forehead, it was cool and wet. The fever had broken, and he was lying in a pool of sweat. Trying not to wake him, I eased out the sudden bedding and flung into the corner, replacing it with soft, dry skins that lay ready, and wiped down him with a linen cloth, and I was just pulling up the coverlid when his eyes opened, and he lay flat, frowning at me, in the first time in many days that I had seen him look at someone as though actually knowing that they were there, as though actually knowing who they were. "Prosper, what in the name of the Black One do you think you're doing?" he said, and his voice was weak but clear cut as a whiplash. "Nothing that need concern you," I told him. "Let you go back to sleep." When he woke again, it was near sunrise, and the first gray promise of daylight, dimming in the light of the lamp, and the sky beyond the high window barred with saffron. He tried to sit up, then fell back and lay looking at me, the frown deepening down into his brows. "Great mother of foals, my head swimming. I feel like a half-drowned kitten. What amiss with me?" "You were wounded, and you have been ill," I said. "Lie still, and you'll mend." He fumbled up one hand and found the puckered scar in the chart, and then changed and gouged out shape of his cheekbone. "There were studs in that club. I saw them in the moonlight." "So did I said. "Yes, you were there." The fumbling hand was across his eyes. "I remember, but there's the great holes in it, like a dream. There was a moon in the mist, blood everywhere. The horses," his voice, which had begun to blur, cleared again with quick anxiety. "It is well with my horse." "All is well with your horse. He's in the stable here." "Here? You are in the woman's house in Dunedin. Trust you? And the queen and her woman tending you." He let out a crack of what would have been laughter if he had not been so weak and had such a broken sound to it, but his mind had gone on to other things. "So we got back to Dunedin. All those empty benches in the mead hall last night," the king said. "Was it true?" "Not an evil dream." "Truth," I said. "But it was not last night. You have been lain sick for 4 days." His arm was still across his face as though for a shield. "The king betrayed us," he said, he said through shut teeth. "I think he was caught in a kind of web. It was the only thing he could do." "He could have broken the web." "How? Is he not Artos?" "He is not Artos. That is a true word." He remained for a little, his arm shielding his face. Then he let out a fall away and reached out towards me. "You brought me off." "I am your shield bearer," I said. "I brought you off." Why in Epona's name didn't you leave me to die with the rest?" "Bringing you off seemed like a good idea at the time. Maybe one day it will seem like that to me too. Maybe one day I'll thank you for it." "Not you," I thought. "You are not one to thank anybody for anything." I do not think he knew that he was clinging to my hand like a drowning man as he drifted off to sleep again. Okay, guys, so what I think I'm going to do is actually read the last chapter to you guys in class on Tuesday, okay? So, I'm going to save this last chapter for our class Tuesday to read. If there's anybody that's not there for any reason, I will record it and send it out so that person can listen to it. But so that's it for the recordings, and I will see you guys on Tuesday.